We are also broadcasting live on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and YouTube. And we will just get started in a couple of minutes.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent. I think we have everybody on board and we are all set to get started. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees and those who are joining with us live on Facebook, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. We want to keep this a very interactive discussion, so please do send us your questions. You can do that on Zoom using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can also do that by giving a comment in LinkedIn or on Facebook, and we will try to focus on audience questions throughout this. I just wanted to set a little bit of context. The NEP, which has been passed by Cabinet, is a very revolutionary new education policy. It has dramatically changed the entire education landscape all across the country. It is being cheered by almost most progressive quarters due to its far-reaching, not only I would say long-term vision, but aggressive and short-term implementation cycles. Most of the changes that we will see is not a Vision 2050 or a Vision 2030, but rather a roadmap for implementation starting 2021. Then the next deadline is 2025. And then, of course, the final deadline is 2030. In that context, although the macro education policy is at the central level, it still remains to be seen what is the impact of that post going through the lawmaking and the legislative process and the bills that first at the central level and then, of course, at the state level. While the NEP is very specific in certain areas, including prescribing what to teach for 10 days or 15 days on a particular topic, in others, it gives a large amount of freedom for interpretation, both at the central level and at the state level. And it remains to be seen, therefore, what is the true impact on the ground. I am joined by a phenomenal panel today who understand and work in depth in the Delhi ecosystem. As you all know, Delhi is considered to be perhaps the most dense educational ecosystem of the entire country. The sheer number of internationally and nationally recognized colleges, both public and private, nationally and internationally recognized schools that are both public and private, outweigh any other cluster in the country. Delhi also is unique, given that the fact that it is a half state and half union territory. And therefore, the implementation of the NEP in Delhi would be have far-reaching implications to all across the country and may even make or break what happens with the NEP. For those who have been tracking the history of education and implementation in Delhi for the last 20 to 30 years, Delhi has always set its own laws and its own paradigms, sometimes for the better, oftentimes for the worse. and tends to like to figure out how it wants to do it. Particularly, we have had a government in the past, I think now 6 to 7 years, who has really put an emphasis on public education, really and really investing rapidly, particularly in school education, and making it a highlight of their mandate and platform. That said, in the past 6 months, due to the COVID-19 crisis, this has put a unique amount of stress throughout the education system. And while the NEP offers amazing opportunities for existing in education setups as well as new, uh, there is a fundamental question on whether we have the resources, the money, and funding all across the ecosystem to be truly able to deliver on the changes. The Delhi government, for example, gets about 54% of its income and revenue from GST, another 16 to 20%, which is indirectly or even directly connected to business activity. Most of that revenue has overnightly disappeared, and the state budget that was presented pre-COVID-19 is no longer valid. So it is a bit concerning if the government will be able to keep up the level of expenditure in education that it has promised. There are of course similar issues at the central government. Although the NEP says 6% of GDP shall be spent on education, there are questions that will that 6% be achieved due to the shrinking of the GDP, or will that 6% be achieved by dramatically increasing funding, much of which is not there. And I think having a conversation, therefore, on the implementation of the NEP in Delhi, I think is going to be a phenomenal discussion. And to kick things off, if I may invite Shri Shailendra Sharma ji, who is the principal advisor to the Director of Education in the Directorate of Education, Government of NCT Delhi. He's had a very strong history, both in education and, sir, if I go on, it'll be an hour before I cover all that you have done. But sufficiently to say, he's someone who can speak as an insider, and to some extent as an outsider as well, and be impartial in his thinking. We were supposed to have Atishi ji with us today. I believe she is a little ill, hopefully not COVID-19, uh, but hopefully either she or somebody else from the government might be joining us in the next 10 to 15 minutes. But for right now, Sharma ji, over to you, please, sir.
Thank you, Aditya. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction and the ground that you have laid down on new education policy and the context of Delhi. That makes, I think, everybody's job very simple here as we go. Let me begin by sharing a small anecdote about me. I love reading the recipe column in the Sunday newspaper. And I've been reading it every week for last many years. Those gives wonderful recipe to make new food items, but that does not necessarily mean that I end up cooking whatever is written over there. In the context of new education policy, what I would want to say is that it's a very good recipe. I think nobody can have a very serious disagreement on what it says, what it seeks to achieve. Of course, considering the diversity of our country, there cannot be any document which is going to meet the expectation of everybody always. But by and large, what I feel is that barring the semantics and certain areas, there's a large agreement. And Aditya, you rightly said that this is a very progressive and forward-looking document. We take it as that. And nobody could disagree that in the next 20 years, this new education policy sets an aspiration to create a world-class education system in our country, which is second to none. We should provide equitable access to all children of irrespective of their social and economic background. education of highest quality. So this is what it aspires to achieve, and we must aspire. That is given, and that's the way it looks. But coming back to my recipe analogy, I think apart from the recipe, we need three key things, which then translates the recipe into an actual dish. And those are: A, the willingness of the person involved; B, you need to have a cook; and C, you need to have ingredients for that. So I think as we go along, we will have to see that in the same context. And therefore, if we were to draw the parallel in terms of what it will take to implement this policy, and Aditya, I'm taking the liberty to straight away jumping to the implementation portion, because in the last 2 months or so, I think this policy has received a lot of attention. In fact, so much so that as we speak right now, the Prime Minister of India is also talking about the new education policy today. So, and in the span of last 2 months, he has spoken at least not, if no, I think two or three times. So that's the kind of attention this policy has got. So I don't need to repeat what it actually contains, because by and large people have seen that. So we will get to the implementation part. And what I see, and this is again coming from my Delhi experience largely, and as you said, both insider as well as outsider context, what I saw was that there is three things that would require any policy to actually see the light of the day. First and foremost is the political will. And second is commitment to fund. And the third one is a detailed plan of action with factoring where you are right now. And in the context of India by the Delhi government, 43% children are in the schools run by private bodies, and 20% in the schools run by the central government, which includes municipal corporations school, which includes Kendriya Vidyalayas, Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas. So that's the kind of distribution that we have. So three clear different bodies actually have a very direct stake in running, administering, and the Delhi education setup. Now, what we saw over the last 6 years in case of Delhi was there was a very strong political commitment for education, so much so that the current government made it at the top of its political agenda. And this was displayed by the kind of, say, policies laid down by the Delhi government over the last 6 years or so. And that political commitment was also matched by strong funding. So the budget to education was almost doubled immediately. Right now, Delhi spends 25% of its budget on education, which is like highest in the country. And the political commitment part and the budgetary allocation goes hand in hand, because no matter what good things you talk about, but if you are not allocating resources for it, then those becomes empty promises, and the cynicism grows then as a result of it. So therefore, not just we had a very good cook in case of Delhi, but also ingredients were also placed. So therefore, the recipe was actually leading towards the actual making of food. So budget becomes very important, and we have seen, because in the context of any reform that you are talking about, one has to also battle with the accumulated cynicism of the system. Ye to ho nahi sakta ji. So if you have to display the political will, your promise has to match with action. And this we have seen that happening in the case of Delhi. And the third important part is a detailed plan of action. It's not enough to say big things and the broad things. The devil lies in the details. So if you do not have a plan of actions for specific components, the big things becomes very hollow. And one of my reservations with this new education policy is that it has not given attention to those kinds of details. On the budgetary allocation part, it did mention about the 6% of the GDP allocations, but we have seen that 6% promise right from 1968 till now. None of the government have actually met that promise. So that doesn't inspire a lot of hope that probably in times to come this would be taken seriously. And that is why the Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi has been insisting that apart from this policy, I think the parliament should also bring in a law to commit 6% of GDP, bind the governments on this part, just as you have Fiscal Responsibility Act. Similarly, have allocation, 6% allocation by law, mandate that, because that is going to set many balls rolling. Many of the things that is said in this policy will become operational only if you have the resources to do that. So anyway, coming back to the detailed action plan part, I can quote 6 specific example which I have taken directly from the new education policy and traced it back to what Delhi government, Delhi schools have done over the last 5-6 years, which can inform the implementers about that. First and foremost is that the new education policy talks about, it says that no school should remain deficient on infrastructure support. That's very critical. And particularly in the case of government schools, we have seen across the country dilapidated structures. Actually, this dichotomy between the private school and the government schools also gets pronounced, and this gap becomes by the sheer look at the kind of infrastructure that the government schools mostly have. So in Delhi, the government had given very detailed attention to not just augment the infrastructure, to not just double the kind of the infrastructure that it inherited, but also to give a very aesthetic look to it. Because where the teacher is going to come and spend the time, where children are going to spend their time, it is going to impact their own sense of esteem. So that is why a very good infrastructure with labs, libraries, playgrounds, staff room, these are very critical things this new education policy talks about, and Delhi has given a very detailed attention. So if you go into any Delhi government school today, you will see what I'm actually saying. And this is a very significant part of that. Second part is that at the center of all these reforms, teachers have to play a critical role. Delhi again had taken a lot of steps to bring teacher right at the center, not just working on their self-esteem part, but also giving them the world-class exposure and training, sending them to, say, places like Singapore, to Finland, to Cambridge, to get exposure, because it is not enough to sit and attend some kind of training, but also you need to see and get a worldview so that then you can think of, locate yourself globally where you are and what best you can give to your students. Also, from amongst the teachers, we have created teacher supporter, peer learners, and all those things, which this new education policy talks about. But I must say that these requires a very detailed hand-holding and pushing through. So these two were on the structural part. And I will take, for example, on the functional part. You see, in this policy, it very strongly talks about foundational literacy and numeracy. And it gives so much importance to this aspect that it goes on to say that the rest of this policy becomes redundant if we do not give due attention to this foundational literacy and numeracy part. And this is true. Across the states, we have seen what Asar has been pointing out for the last 10 years, 15 years, that children are in the schools, not maybe in grade 5, and half the class cannot even read a text that they are supposed to be able to read in the first 2 years of schooling. Now imagine a curriculum which is built upon the assumption that the child should be able to read the textbook, and if half the class cannot read that, that's problematic. So the new education policy gives due attention. A chapter has been devoted on that. We welcome that. That's very critical. But at the same time, Delhi government had taken note of this, and we have had programs like Mission Bunyad, which was going on to target specifically these aspects. And this has happened in partnership with parents, community, and schools. So we have had school management committees chipping in. We have parents' participation in that to actually create a community-owned model to ensure that the child actually learns to read, write, and do basic mathematics. So that's very critical into it. The second part, the second important thing that this education policy talks about is the introduction of ethics and social emotional learning in the entire school curriculum. And it also, quotes unquotes, doing what is right. So a lot of emphasis on is also given on building social and emotional resilience among children in this policy. Now, if you recollect, Delhi in 2018 had introduced happiness curriculum in its school, which is precisely along these lines, that it's not enough for the child to just learn to, the cognitive aspects, but also the emotional and social aspect of the child also has to be built very strongly in the school curriculums. And the happiness curriculum of Delhi has been seen as a model across the world. We have visitors coming from different countries to see what we are doing, because that is the model at such a large scale, being done consistently as part of a regular school curriculum is not something which anybody is doing. And many states also coming and seeing that part. So I think that can be a takeaway on that. The third, the education policy talks about very rightly about building scientific temper and evidence-based thinking, problem solving. Now, this is what when we introduce entrepreneurship mindset curriculum, this was at the back of our mind. Because at the end of school education or college education, we do not want to just create an army of job seekers who would be standing to get absorbed in the job market. It's also that we need people to be job creators, and it has to, this mindset has to start right in the school. So that is why this curriculum was introduced. And the last part I would say is that the policy also talks about new skills like coding, values like respect for the constitution, fundamental duties and all. And these are the parts which we have been doing through specific campaigns. Like we have a coding program right now going for the girls. We will expand it for the boys also. We have had Constitution at 70 campaigns running across the schools last year. So these, but the reason I'm highlighting all these things, Aditya, is that everything required a detailed planning. It is not enough to say that this is what we want to achieve. Unless we sit down and work to make it happen, it's not going to happen. So what I would say is that Delhi perhaps is standing at a certain pedestrian where it can take a next big step. And many of the things that this new education policy talks about to be attained in over 20 years, perhaps we can do it much earlier.
Absolutely.
And we have like to set up a new curriculum committee, new board committee to basically bring in the learnings of the new education policy, our own accumulated experiences over the years, and create a model, at least for the Delhi itself, that this is what is possible in Delhi, and take the next leap forward. So overall, I would say I am very hopeful, very inspired by this policy, but at the same time, I'm also very cautious that this would require a very strong political will, not just at the level of the central government, but also at the level of the states. But at the same time, I am also very optimistic, because unlike 1968 or 86, when the previous policies were announced, I mean, I don't think any of us had followed at that point in time what kind of attention it received. But I don't think it would have received this kind of attention in those days as we are doing it right now. So what is more significant here is that the aspiration of people is high now. The kind of debate that we are seeing, the kind of participation we are seeing, is giving a lot of hope that perhaps it is the people who would push the governments to take action in that direction. So it's no more optional on the part of government to say whether or not they would want. It should be built as a social movement to demand of the government that India is ready to take the next step forward. Delhi is ready to take the next step forward, and we must take those next step forward to give the education that the children of today actually need for the future tomorrow.
Thank you so much, sir. I think those are very inspiring words. And I'm going to come back to you, G, on what the government of NCT is thinking about specific implementation. If you remember, sir, that before COVID-19 came in, the Honorable Education Minister, the Deputy CM, had also mentioned that Delhi would be coming up with its own Delhi board and split off from CBSE. And I think that also plays a very interesting role on perhaps seeing how NEP can be quickly implemented And as you rightly said, you can't follow the recipe exactly. It has to be tailor made for the taste buds of every single person locally. And I think the NEP gives that autonomy and flexibility to do that. Before we start on to our panel discussion, could I please have a quick video from our sponsors, please? Charlie, if you could just roll that. Thank you so much. We are always grateful to all of our sponsors, without whom these wonderful webinars, these sessions would not be possible. We would quickly now like to deep dive into the panel discussion and open it up to questions from the audience as well. Please use the Q&A tab on Zoom. If you're joining us on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, please use the links there, and it would be our pleasure to try to bring you into this discussion. Of course, on-point questions will be taken up. We can't deal with rants and side comments and personal questions there. If you want a particular panelist to cover something, please do ask directly. Professor Kaur, we already have a number of your students excited to be in the audience. We are having their comments coming in, so just wanted to share their best wishes with you. And since you're on that, we'll start with you, ma'am. Just please make sure that you're unmuted, because the host tends to mute whoever is not actively speaking. What I would love to is that, one of the big, you lead one of the premier colleges of the country. SRCC has made its name year after year after year as one of the institutions that is the forefront of education in India. Now today, I would like you to comment more as a distinguished educationist rather than the principal or the director of that college, and give your remarks on an overall macro view of the education policy. One of the big changes that NEP brings about is an end to affiliating universities. I know we have massive affiliating universities such as Guru Nanak Dev University, IP University, Bombay University, and of course DU as well. The policy envisions that within 5 to 10 years, each and every college, each and every institution becomes an autonomous institution, whether it is and I won't go into what the policy says, but effectively we are creating mini universities all across, even if the particular college or institution chooses not to call itself that. How do you see that changing the ecosystem in Delhi, particularly when there are so many public and private colleges, so many affiliated colleges there? Where do you think the challenges are, and where do you think the implementation will actually happen?
Thank you so much. Yes, you rightly mentioned, my responses would be more from an education public policy professor perspective, not necessarily in the context of my observations as the principal, but all my students who are on the platform and everybody else, a very hearty good morning to all of you. I hope I'll be able to address this question, but in order to respond, it's very important, Aditya, that I give you the background of the education system and what world-class institutions are generally made up of. So I'll have a minute of each of these, and then I'll come back and directly answer your question, because responding to what you are saying, the background is important, why this particular step has been initiated. If I look at the background and what are the aspirations of the youth to be future ready, to be able to meet the aspirations of the corporate sector, which are trying to have these students, but the industry and academia, this link is so huge that the gaps we are unable to meet presently. So more often than not, even the best of the institutions and the professional colleges, including the engineering streams, most of the students are unable to find the kind of jobs they are looking in the market. And these days, yes, very rightly, we are also trying to have innovation and entrepreneurship and startups as an alternative in the colleges and the universities, because there is so much of youth. And if you want the dividend of the youth not to become destructive over time, it is very important that they are remaining engaged as soon as they graduate. And the reality is not so good, because we are not creating the kind of youth which is readily absorbed by the industry or the entrepreneurship cells, barring a few premier institutions. That is fun. So we must do something for the youth. Now, what do we do for the youth? We must create world-class institutions. And if you look up, my second part is, what are world-class institutions made up of? The first part would be your talent. Who are your students? What is your faculty? And what is the kind of research that they are providing? The second aspect is your infrastructure, whether it is your physical infrastructure or whether it's your financial infrastructure or whatever. It could be an IT infrastructure. It could be your wealth of the alums that you have created. But the third most important part, which, sir, is directly related to what your query is on, is the regulatory framework. What is the governance structures under which each of these institutions is operating? And this is a very important pillar. In fact, the World Bank classifies it as the third important pillar for creating institutions which are world-class. World-class meaning the students are well in demand wherever they go, and lifelong learning skills have been imparted to them while they are in their higher education. Unfortunately, sir, what has happened over the time is that several colleges have mushroomed in the capacity of private institutions. And if you read up some of the op-ed kind of a literature, it's also been saying that the spread is like a plague. So it's really spreading very high. Now, having more institutions is not necessarily bad. So why are we saying that we don't want this kind of an institutions to be mushrooming? It's primarily because the way in which many of them are imparting knowledge. I would not like to mention here, you always have exceptions all across. But the general issues that emerge, sir, are as follows, that these are the institutions where infrastructure is suboptimal, whether it is the physical infrastructure or whether it is the financial infrastructure. So you're not able to give the leverage to the student in terms of what is desired. The second part is, sir, that anytime you're an affiliated college, you work as an independent college yourself, but you are in collaboration with a particular university. So you're affiliated to a university. So the colleges of affiliated universities are working independently, but in collaboration with an existing university. Now, this kind of a system we are thinking of merging, and we want that these affiliated colleges should either become a constituent college of that particular university with whom they are collaborating, or become autonomous. Now, the question is, what is the advantage of a constituent university college in a university? And I take the example of Delhi University. There are several colleges. We are all constituent colleges of the University of Delhi. The structural framework of a constituent college is that we don't work independently. The guidelines are framed by the university. And within those broad guidelines, the colleges are operating. So the functional autonomy may be given, but the overall guidelines are provided by the particular university. So in a way, for any constituent college, the mentorship or the umbrella which is providing you a shelter, it's a closer symbiotic relationship between the college and your mentoring authority, which is your university. It's not so in an affiliated.
I am going to ask you a very simple question here. So in your opinion, the NEP will allow the constituent college system to still be active. It's not going
Yes.
to, it is not asking that the constituent colleges have to break up and go their separate ways.
None.
Rather,
No.
every university gets to choose how it makes its constituent colleges, how it creates its own core quality and values. And constituents colleges, even if there might be several colleges teaching the same subject, are reflected in the NEP.
Yes, sir, you are right, Mr. Burlia. The present policy is not asking the colleges to unwind themselves as constituent colleges. We are allowed to maintain status quo. And the affiliated colleges cannot maintain status quo. They either become constituent colleges of a particular university or go the autonomous way. But they
Now,
cannot work as a affiliated body toward university.
Now, Professor Kaur, you mentioned, and I think the NEP, and for many of those who are in the audience, the NEP didn't magically appear one day. There were multiple drafts over the last year or so, starting with a 350-page draft, and a 150-page draft, and a 76-page draft. And then finally, I think 64 pages was the last one that was passed. And I think while we interpret what the thinking was behind the policy, reading those initial drafts sort of gives you an idea of even though perhaps things that were left out, what the framers were trying to go for. And something which Professor Kaur raised, one of the big things which was perhaps in stronger language put in earlier drafts, was this entire issue of these mushrooming colleges all across the country. Many of which who were made not for education purposes, but to launder money. I will be more direct, Professor Kaur, or to, change land use. And they don't have the requisite accreditations either nationally or internationally. They are not subjecting themselves to NAC. They're not subjecting them to international bodies, the APSA or what have you. And the policy has also said very clearly, the final one, that it wishes all 10,000 B.Ed colleges which are hanging around to close. Professor Kaur, will that actually happen? Or do you, because one of the critiques was a lot of the enforcement teeth was taken out of the policy when it finally got passed. Earlier there was a notion that every college which could clear a certain NAC level would be allowed to then be supported and expanded into the new policy. And that has been left out. Do you think that there is political will, as Sharma ji had put it, to close down en masse all these degree mills, all these fake colleges, all these colleges which are pretending to give degrees and diplomas?
I think you are now trying to give a match between the vision and the reality. Yes, vision is rightly that you want to close them. But the moment you talk about the reality aspect comes in the implementation. And the political will is important. And more so because education is a concurrent list. So each state is actually now going to be allowed to phase out their own policies and prioritize their own policies. And I think I should not be saying that each state would be doing what is there in the policy, because it's going to be a sequencing as a phasing out. And depending upon the ideology of the government in power in that particular state, they are the ones who will prioritize. And if they have the willpower and it's there on their priority list, I think we would be able to see these things come up earlier in such leading states as compared to the other states who would be adhering to the policy norms, but probably postponing implementation of certain aspects, which according to them is not on their priority.
And of course, the entire politics of this plays out. I want to bring in Professor Das on this. Professor Das, one of the consequences of NEP is, as an independent college, you will be asked to turn into a university at a very short notice, implement a high degree of the multidisciplinary curriculum, much of it which I am sure and believe you are already doing. Could you just expound on how that will change the face of Delhi education system for your institution, but also for all other institutions in the city who are and to take from Professor Kaur's, let's focus on the reputable ones. Let's not focus on the little shop in Malviya Nagar which is calling themselves X college or university, but rather those who have cleared the requisite regulations as they stand today, and hopefully will therefore build out on the new regulations as they come in tomorrow. So over to you. Please do unmute yourself. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indian higher education is very special in the world in terms of the variations and the complications in rules and regulations which are there. Now, in the university system, as Professor Kaur was elucidating, you have the constituent college and the affiliated college. So they follow the rules of the university and then they operate in that framework. So they have a flexibility or whatever they want to do within the purview of the university. So if the university is good, then the affiliated college may still be able to do well. Otherwise, they'll operate, in that particular level. So that's one side of the story, the university system. We are an autonomous body. We operate under AICTE, the Regulator for Higher Education and Technical Education. Now, AICTE gives the permission to autonomous institutions to operate, particularly for management programs. There are reportedly close to 3,000 institutes running management program, which is PGDM, Postgraduate Diploma in Management. PGDM is a very special thing anywhere in the world. I don't think it is offered in any other country. Wherever you have a MBA degree, it's an MBA degree, it's master's degree. In India, is a very exception country where you are not offering an MBA, but you are offering postgraduate diploma. If you
and for our audience, the reason why this is here is that rather because for 34 years we haven't had a comprehensive new education policy. We've had these various band-aids and tack-ons and all these small things, and one of those was the PGDM. Please go ahead.
And there's a very interesting background to PGDM, and we must not forget that. We must understand it very well, why the PGDM started and the environment for which the PGDM got started may continue to be playing a very important role today. Now, for example, the IIMs, when they started offering a management program at post-graduation level way back in 1960s, first was IIM Calcutta and next was IIM Ahmedabad. They were not formed as a university. They were not formed on the lines of IIT through an act of parliament, but they were formed as societies. So as a society, they could not offer a degree. So they were offering only diploma courses, which is absolutely fine. Now, we must understand why the government allowed an institution to be operating, offering a diploma course, not a degree course. Now, the simple reason is that at that point of time, because of the nature of management education, which was new on the block, the institutions wanted a tremendous amount of autonomy and flexibility in operating. Now, to be in sync with the industry, to be in sync with the society's requirements, to be in sync with the aspirations of the students. And that's how the PGDM got started. And they have done extremely well. And all these top-end IIMs are the iconic institutions in the world today. But now, today...
Yeah, it's all gone, right? It's
today,
gone, PGDM is gone, IIM is also gone.
Yeah, so today, they are a degree-granting institution because times have changed. They have attained a certain level. They enjoyed the autonomy and flexibility. And now with the new purview of their ability to grant degrees, they hope to maintain and continue to have the autonomy. Now comes the the placement of these what do we call the autonomous institutions in the world space. There are these thousands of
I'm going to interrupt you there. You said something very remarkable, and I want to focus on that because I think that really said what you mentioned was the PGDM, and you were going through the history of it, and of course all of us here know what happened to the IIMs and all that history as well, the ICT, all that, and of course the new version of the ICT, which has been running for the last 3 to 5 years under the great leadership of the current chairman. But coming NEP, right? 3 things are going to happen. First, all colleges cannot be single stream. You have to be a multidisciplinary college. Second, No more PGDM, this degree, that degree, a full rationalization of degrees. You can't have multiple different education systems running in a similar country. You can't have one law for IIT, IIM, one law for private, one law for public, one law for affiliating, one law for constituting, right? It all brings it together, right? No more single stream. Everybody gets to give a degree as is, whereas, and then all the old regulators are gone. We have now full new regulators, a four-pronged approach, each which is supposed to support education institutions rather than prevent them or gatekeep them, or in some of the more professional bodies perhaps extort them for money. Under this new regime, what are the critical changes do you think that are going to happen in the Delhi ecosystem, particularly for single stream independent colleges like yours who have gained a reputation? There are several of them in Delhi as well. How do you see this platform changing?
See, higher education, particularly in engineering and the management, they have a look of a pan-India. So we have students coming across the country. Now, education is a concurrent list, so there are certain implications coming in from the state government. Now, when you operate under AICT, you don't have any operating regulations coming from the
Professor
state.
Das, AICT is gone, right?
No, I'm coming to that. So it is the so when you say AICT, it is the regulator. So now we have had certain kind of a regulatory environment, and now the NEP comes in. Now NEP mandates that you cannot be a single discipline autonomous institution. You must become multidisciplinary. So the two questions that come in here: what is meant by multidisciplinary, and what all can be done to be qualified as a multidiscipline. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a world famous management university in Singapore called Singapore Management University, SMU. Now, they run only management course, nothing else. And they run accounting programs. They run some finance programs. Now, can they be called multidisciplinary? They are a university and they are world class. So, when we are running a management program, if I run a degree in accounting, when I run a degree in data analytics, would I be multidisciplinary, or do I have to run a course in arts and science otherwise to be classified as a multidisciplinary? So we are awaiting those rules and regulations to be clarified as to the meaning of multidisciplinary.
Point, right? Because as you said, although the NEP does talk about multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary and does give some examples, how far do you have to go from your single stream, right? Because as you said, if you do accounts, finance, data analytics, now data analytics may go into computer science, you might have project management, you might have 4 or 5 other allied disciplines, but can the regulator come back and say, well, that's all management, right? And
so we need clarification from that. Because if it is a diversification in accounting or a data management kind of a stream, that would be easy. But if you were told to, you must run an arts course, or you must run a sports course, or a nursing course, then you have a situation on hand, and you need to diversify with that kind of a perspective. So we are awaiting clarification on it.
Yeah. But as an educator, and this is my last question, Professor. I'll bring in everybody else on this as well. As an educator, if the government came up and said, no, I'm sorry, Professor Das, you have to pick at least one arts course or one humanities course to qualify, which course would you love to pick? And not for 4, of course, but in general, do you think that, okay, this would provide the most value to a management school as a multidisciplinary course? It has nothing to do with management.
Sure. We are exploring various options, and being a professional institution, and management becomes a professional domain. So we are looking at professional courses. For example, we are trying to explore sports. We are trying to explore healthcare system, and there are a couple of more. So, and we are also a second campus that we are exploring. We already have. So we would diversify. We are awaiting clarification in the government as to what is meant by multidisciplinary. But just one sec. But why I gave you the example of SMU, Singapore, is they are a world-class institution. So if you go deep into one discipline, which is your forte, you can excel and very quickly reach, the world class and top world class level. If you diversify, then your expertise may not be, quickly ramped up to the world class level. So there's a trade-off in where you want to diversify that we need to understand. So
That was
SMU is
correct,
only in
sir.
management, and they go to the top. If you want to take up a non-professional courses, and the government says you must diversify, oh sure, they will do it. But then to reach world class, you need to do a lot of permutation and combination. It may take a little longer. If you have the desire to reach world class, then it will be a little, time consuming. So that's the point that we need to look at.
Fantastic, Professor Hassan. I love the interplay that you are worried that by going multidisciplinary, that your single focus on a single stream might be diluted. Point well taken, Ji. Love to get Mr. Singh in. Sir, you have looked at education from skill development, from industry, and from a wide variety of hats. Would love to get in your thoughts on how you see the NEP coming in to help and aid industry. One of the things that we always, if I got a rupee for every time I heard industry academia interface, at an education conference, I would have at least, 10, 15,000 rupees in my pocket just from that. It's become a cliche. And hopefully the NEP allows us to move beyond that. What are your thoughts on the implementation of NEP? How does it impact industry?
Yeah, at the outset, like I would say that it is a very bold step. The entire structure is, being visualized to be replanned. Implementation will take its own time. And especially when it is a concurrent subject, I know many a central act, what fate they meet when it comes to the ground. We started with a road safety policy and very stringent fines and all. And within a couple of weeks, that all went off for a six, and all the states, they reverted back to their previous system. So I only hope that the education policy also does not meet the same fate. See, all these private colleges, like if you take a snapshot that what exists as of now in terms of education being run through these private colleges, you will find that in all private colleges there are students, there is a population which is associated with it, and overnight we can't wish them off. And then there will be systems, people will go to court, they will find ways and means to obstruct what is being.
But interesting, I'd like to add, although Professor Cork kicked us off on private colleges, the number of public colleges as well who are doing an absolute horrible job in educating our students are also far and wide. If you look at the NAC rankings of many of the public, so-called well-funded public colleges, even some of the old names, I am shocked how horrible their outcomes are, how pathetic their teaching infrastructure is, how they've not upgraded as well. So, if in the earlier NEP policy, part of the reason they in fact didn't really talk about private colleges, they actually talked about shutting down many of the public colleges because they said they were abject failures. If some politician went somewhere and said, "Yahan college laga do," and miraculously a new college appeared there without any semblance of of proper institutional building. And it became a political issue rather than this. So while we are talking about private colleges, we also have to see there's huge thousands and thousands of public colleges also which don't meet the cut.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Aditya. See, in today's context, certain things are being seen and planned. How the context will appear a decade down the line, nobody is aware of. And even the people who are the planners and who are the executors, where they will stand over a period of time, nobody knows. See, one thing which I would like to say is that finally, in our country, everything rotates around the political will, and the political interference is in everything. It is in a big way in education, in medical, in sports. You take any aspect of life, there is a political intervention. So even in corporate world, means you will not be surprised, and you know better than me that how much political intervention is there, how much regulation is there. And means I love reading that book of Guru Charan Das, that India grows, the corporate grows when the government sleeps. So even if you just let us do our work honestly, the good will survive and the bad will die, natural death. Finally, it is cost and quality.
I want to get one aspect into this, and if we still have Mr. Sharma, sir, if you're still there, I know your video is gone. You have worked on the side, but if you're still there, would love to get you in on this as well. You know, one of the criticisms that have come from certain elements of the governments at the state level is that by giving autonomous powers to both colleges and schools, public and private, suddenly that government interference in their day-to-day activities has been removed considerably. And I think a lot of officials and bureaucrats who are used to lording over these institutions, extorting them, again, both public and private, just because they were elected for a few years or they have come into a position for a few years, they feel they have the right to dictate to institutions which might be decades, if not hundreds of years old, how they should do, what they should teach. That has been firmly removed in the NEP, and I can see a lot of heartburn on their side that their interference has gone. And I think the NEP has clearly said, dear governments, focus on your own schools and own colleges. Stop trying to intervene in other governments and other and in other private institutions, schools and colleges. Do you see an acceptance by government at the state level, and particularly in Delhi, that they need to stop interfering in schools and colleges? Or is it just still heartburn that they lost a lot of regulatory powers, and now where will their extortion and bribes and other things come from? I think Sharma ji is there, but I think he's doing some work. Harbhajan ji, do you think that politicians and bureaucrats who have suddenly lost all these powers to wake up one morning and say, give dikkats, that, bag should only be so many kilos, without any input from the public sphere, or politicians coming in and saying that nobody should increase fees at all, or this class should be taught in this university without any proper notion, that has come to an end? Sharmaji, I hope you heard my question.
Can you repeat that?
Sharmaji, I'll quickly summarize to be less. Effectively, what the NEP has done, it has told state governments that stop interfering in schools and colleges, manage your own staff first, stop giving dikkats to others, stop trying to extort them, stop trying to, for a government which has been there for 3-4 years, or an officer who has been appointed for a couple of years, stop trying to micromanage institutions which have been there for decades or 100 years plus, leave them as autonomous institutions. There's been a lot of heartburn by certain bureaucrats and politicians, both public and private, in losing this control, in losing their ability to interfere, and in some cases losing the ability to extort them. And again, extort both public and private for their own personal or political agendas. Do you think that politicians and bureaucrats in states across India will actually allow institutions to be autonomous, or will, in the implementation, they will find ways to make sure that their personal dikkats and their agendas and their ability to interfere continues?
No, you see, no policy or law actually allowed them to create that kind of cloud which actually emerged.
No, but if I were to sorry, just to push back, various states had passed laws giving their Directorate of Education, even in the NCT, or their higher education authorities to be able to intervene. Many states, some of which are neighboring to our NCR, licensed universities via state laws and put in very, very onerous clauses. You had a number of deemed universities also, all of which have been gone off. And over time, what we saw is that in the name of, saving some specific strata of society, they're wanting to intervene. And you of all people know the level of corruption and degree of stupidity that had completely destroyed the education sector because of these interventions and extortions, and all in the name of doing good. These powers have been removed, at least notionally, in the NEP. Do you think states will actually implement this part, or will they conveniently say, look, we want to continue our ability to dictate whatever we want to dictate?
No, say if I were to talk about is in the context of a school education, I can say that in Delhi, the school education is governed by the Delhi School Education Act 1973, and that gives the power to the state, to the government to regulate
But the
the schools.
NEP has cancelled that because it has said the Department of Education is
It
gone and they
hasn't.
can no longer.
It hasn't. What it is specifically says is that instead of say the Directorate of Education performing dual function, that is, it is
You
running its
split
own
it.
school and regulating others, you have to create a regulatory structure. So Directorate of Education can run the school, government schools, and there could be an independent, autonomous regulatory structure which will regulate both government school as well as the private schools.
The independent and autonomous, though, correct?
Autonomous, yeah. So as I said, see, the point here is that the regulatory function of the state is not going to go away anytime soon, because that's the function of the government to do that.
Fair
Now,
enough.
herein comes the political will and the integrity. So there are provisions in the law which empowers the government to say set up a good institution, make sure that they run properly. But if those powers are used selectively, then to any law can be misused. So what the example that you are giving is of a misuse. I'll give you an example of Delhi. Now, under the Delhi law, no private schools, school education, if I were to talk about, can increase the fee without the approval of the Directorate of Education. Now, on what basis you give approval or you deny, that is not there in the law. That is how you devise your processes. And if say certain dispensations using that selectively to get unlawful gain, that's the way certain system has worked. But if you want to honestly implement that provisions, you can do that, because that is well within your right. And the new education policy doesn't take away that.
So do you think state governments will sabotage this?
I don't see the reason why they would sabotage it. As I said in the beginning, there's nothing in this policy which anybody can have a very serious disagreement with. I remember attending a CAPE committee meeting last year, special, that only two issues which different states were bringing in was one, finance, and the second, that 3-language formula as it was expounded that point in time.
The earlier one, the 350-page, which was a little bit crazy. I think all of us can admit that was a bit crazy.
So now that language issue has been very categorically settled. So I don't think there is any cause of, say, political disagreement on that. There can be different semantic, pedagogical disagreement. That's a separate matter, but they cannot be political.
But those have been left. But those have been rightly left to the states and to the autonomous regulator, as you said, as it should be. Every state which you had mentioned.
I'm answering your question on why anybody would be incentivized to say sabotage that. There's no reason to sabotage that. The only thing which the states will come is, where is the finance? Who is going to foot the bill? So that is going to be a contentious issue. Not that there is any reason to sabotage. At least in the school education segment, I can say that
Sharmaji, just to push back on that, one of the things the NEP has said clearly, the private guys will foot the bill. And I think post-COVID-19, more and more, it looks like the private guys are going to have to foot that bill, because governments don't have the finances to really push up the level of there. To give you some numbers, the entire central higher education budget is pretty much dollar for dollar equivalent to the entire budget of one private university, Harvard University. And there are 10, 20 other private universities around the world with similar budgets. Clearly, the NEP has envisaged, although through a philanthropic thing, and all of us know how that is circumvented, and I think the NEP does enough in it to wink at that circumvention. They couldn't, earlier they came out with a much more pro-private model. They had to tone that down for the final policy. Do you think state governments will now wake up post-COVID-19 and say, look, we just don't have the budget to meet the aspirations of every single student, and we now have to allow the private sector in school and in higher education to thrive? Certain states have taken the notion that, yes, private education in schools and in colleges are something that is here to stay. We don't have the money. Gentlemen, please go ahead and do it. We have deep concerns about quality, and Professor Kaur has iterated those in and out. Many of these do deserve to be shut down immediately rather than there. And hopefully, with an independent regulator and some teeth, this should happen. But do you think state governments have the capacity now to fully endorse and support private education, both in the school and in the higher education sectors?
No, I think if the state government do, that amounts to abdication of their own responsibility. The primary role of providing for a good quality education is that of the government. In this policy, there is this promotion of the philanthropy and private that gives a window to push that. But I think if you look at, take a step back and look at, so this is how even the private schools which are run by the philanthropic institutions, theoretically. But how over, yes. So how over a period of time they start operating, everybody knows. I don't have to repeat on those lines.
But Sharma, I fully agree with you on this, and you know, and this is one point which I must tell everybody. Mr. Sharma has been absolutely great about, and something which I personally agree with him 100%, is that no parent anywhere in India should go to a private school. He should always prioritize going to a government school first, and only if a private school offers something absolutely different, which either their value systems or a way of education or something that they find appealing, they should go. We should never have that a parent chooses a private school because they feel that a government school is not up to power.
Absolutely. And the reason why private schools have, like in Delhi, still if you see the private school participation in school education is like 43%. But in many metros, they have like already more than 50%. And that is because over the years, over the decades, systematically government schools have been crushed due to negligence, due to other aspects, and which is a very serious abdication of responsibility, I would say. So I think the way lies is in even despite Corona, despite this pandemic, I don't think that gives any excuse for the government to kind of say move away from that space. They will have to find ways to support and continue good quality education. It cannot be.
I fully agree with you, and I hope you are right. My best case scenario should be that private education is considered a luxury, and that only those who actually want that luxury and are willing to pay for it and pay whatever exorbitant rate that a private school or a college charge, they should be happy and willing to pay for it. No one should feel that they have no other option. They should always feel that my first option is a very, very good government school. And if I want a 5-star hotel or some other crazy amount, then I should go and pay 5-star rates. But let me not feel that I have to pay for a private school education because I have no choice.
Absolutely.
Shankarji, you have been smiling throughout this entire debate on that, as somebody who's a school leader, as well as I think somebody who talks very deep upon leadership. Love to get you in on your thoughts on the implementation of NEP and the leadership it will be that it will take to actually get this done. Professor Kaur shared that. Professor Das has shared that. Sharma ji has expounded on this. Mr. Singh has also talked about the will, the leadership required for this transformation.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, and namaste to all of you. It was so nice to be all of you. And Chairman, thank you so very much for making part of among such a great personalities. So the point I want to state here, sir, कि हमारे देश में 90% लोग जो पढ़ते हैं वो करते नहीं, और जो काम वो कर रहे होते हैं उसकी उन्होंने कभी पढ़ाई नहीं करी होती है. क्योंकि ऑनेस्टली ये बात है कि पता ही नहीं करना क्या है. सर मैं क्लास 10th में आया, दोस्तों से पूछा क्या सब्जेक्ट लूं, तो मेरे दोस्तों ने कहा शंकर अकाउंट्स ले ले, बहुत कम पढ़ना पड़ेगा. I was very happy taking accounts. Went to Bombay, started doing my BCom. 89 में बाबूजी को कहा बाबूजी मैं MBA करना चाहता हूं. बाबूजी बोले पागल हो गया, मारवाड़ी का बच्चा है. मैंने कहा तो, बोले CA कर. मैंने कहा जी CA मुझे नहीं समझ में आती. बोले तुझे क्या समझ में आता है, इससे मेरा कोई लेन देन नहीं है. बॉटम लाइन इज यू मस्ट डू CA. Sir, after getting so many degrees, handling so much of his business for 16 years, in 2006, I decided and I went to him and I said, Dad, I want to be a teacher. I don't want to be an industrialist. और मुझे घर से निकाल दिया गया. दिल्ली आया, पढ़ाना शुरू किया. The point of stating my story is, यदि हम अपने बच्चों को शुरू से ये नहीं सिखाएं कि लाइफ का एक्चुअल मंत्र क्या है, वो अपना गोल कैसे सेट करें. सर, हमारे टाइम में एक पीरियड होता था SUPW का. आई एम श्योर शर्मा साहब, डॉक्टर जितेंद्र दास जी, हरभजन सिंह साहब, मैडम कौर एग्री करेंगे. SUPW में सारा काम हाथ से करना होता था. सर, आज का बच्चा, और सर मेरे टाइम में सर साल में एक बार नंबर आता था जब पिताजी पूछते थे बेटा पास हो गया. हम पिलानी से घर जाते थे और पूछता बेटा पास हो गया, मैं कहा जी बाबूजी, फिर अगले साल नंबर आता था. आज के तारीख में जैसे डॉक्टर 4 बार कोरोना में बुखार चेक करने को कहता है, पेरेंट आज का दिन में 4 बार अपने बच्चों का टेम्परेचर चेक करता है कि तू क्या कर रहा है, क्या पढ़ रहा है. उसको ये नहीं पढ़ाता कि तू मन से कर, कि तू जो करना चाहता है. वो क्या करता है सर कि तू कंपटीशन की तैयारी कर. आई थिंक ये हमारे NEP सिस्टम में जो हमें मौका दिया है, वो हमें करने का मौका मिलेगा. कि मेरे को लगता है कि दुनिया में सर 2 ही टॉप प्रोफेशंस हैं, टीचिंग एंड पेरेंटिंग. रेस्ट इज ऑल विंडो ड्रेसिंग. और ये समय आया है, और ये मेरे ख्याल से हम सबके लिए इंपॉर्टेंट है सर, कि हम बच्चों को ये सिखाएं. मेरे अपने लाइफ का मंत्र है सर, हम सबको खूब पढ़ना चाहिए. वी मस्ट लर्न एज मच एज वी कैन एंड देन वी शुड अर्न एज मच एज वी कैन. मनी इज नॉट अ डर्टी लैंग्वेज. और सर, जब मैं कॉर्पोरेट वर्ल्ड की ट्रेनिंग करता हूं, मैं कहता हूं व्हेन मनी स्पीक्स नो वन चेक्स द ग्रामर. तो मनी अर्न करना भी कोई बुरा नहीं है, बट व्हेन यू अर्न यू मस्ट रिटर्न टू द सोसाइटी. Learn, earn, and return to the society, I believe, is the biggest philosophy and the biggest mantra which our education system should give it to our children. दूसरी बात मेरा ये मानना है सर, we have many models in this world, but we have very few role models in this world. सर, हमारा टीचर अपग्रेडेशन इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट सर. सर, यदि बचपन में किसी टीचर ने ये कहा ना कि गुजरात की राजधानी अहमदाबाद है, वो बच्चा जिंदगी भर गुजरात की राजधानी अहमदाबाद समझेगा, ना कि गांधीनगर समझेगा सर. सर, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स की आपने बात करी, चाहे गवर्नमेंट है चाहे प्राइवेट स्कूल्स हैं सर, जब तक हम अपने बच्चों को, हमारे टीचर्स को अपग्रेड नहीं करेंगे, और जब तक टीचर्स अपने काम को सर अपना पैशन नहीं समझेंगे सर, और वो कहेंगे यार ये तो मॉर्निंग में गए, सासू मां से बचना पड़ गया, चलो हम जाके आ गए, फिर घर में ये करेंगे, सर वो रॉन्ग फिलॉसफी है मेरे ख्याल से. सबसे हम क्या बात करें सर, बच्चों का एप्टीट्यूड टेस्ट हो, इसका ये हो, अरे भाई टीचर को कौन संभालेगा. मेरे ख्याल से सर, मेरा अपना ये मानना है कि सर जब तक टीचर्स खुद अपने आप को समझ के, यदि हम वो पैरामीटर सेट करें. अच्छा सर, ये भी कई लोग कहते हैं कि साहब टीचर नहीं बनना चाहते. मैं नहीं मानता सर. इन मेनी ऑफ माय मोटिवेशनल स्पीचेस व्हेन आई डू टू द कॉलेजेस एंड स्कूल्स, मैं बच्चों से बाद में पूछता हूं सर आप बच्चों क्या करना चाहते हो. सर मैक्सिमम बच्चे कहते हैं कि सर वी वांट टू बी टीचर. मेरे ख्याल से, और जैसे सर आपने कहा कि इंडस्ट्री एकेडमी का कनेक्शन की बात आपने कही सर, सर हमारे CBSE ने कोर्स डाला एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप का, पर पता है सर मजे की बात क्या है, इस देश में जो एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप पढ़ा रहा है वो एंटरप्रेन्योर है नहीं, और जो एंटरप्रेन्योर है वो एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप पढ़ा नहीं रहा है. कहता भाई ये मेरा काम नहीं है. तो जब तक प्रैक्टिकल लर्निंग नहीं आएगी सर, तब तक काम नहीं होगा. सर जो स्कूल दिल्ली में है, मैं आपको एक छोटी सी विनंती करता हूं सर, ओखला के अंदर ये मैडम कॉलेजेस के लिए भी एप्लीकेबल है और ये स्कूल्स के लिए भी है. मैं हर साल करीब 50,000 बच्चे मैं यहां पे ट्रेन करता हूं सर. ओखला के अंदर एक NSIC, नेशनल स्मॉल इंडस्ट्रीज कॉर्पोरेशन का एक छोटा सा इंक्यूबेशन सेंटर है सर. जितनी ऑडियंस मुझे सुन रही है, मैं आपसे निवेदन करता हूं कि आपके 10th या 12th के बच्चों को, 11th के बच्चों को आप वहां पे लेके जाइए, जहां पर सर हमने 50 मशीन डिस्प्ले करी हुई है. और सर वो छोटी छोटी मशीन है, केचप कैसे बनता है, सॉक्स कैसे बनती है, प्यूरी कैसे बनती है, कैंडल कैसे बनता है, नीडल कैसे बनती है, ईंट कैसे बनती है। सर मैंने हजारों केस स्टडीज वहां पे देखी है, क्योंकि बच्चे का माइंडसेट आज के इस डिजिटल वर्ल्ड में क्या हो गया है कि फैक्ट्री लगाना ही नहीं, 10 करोड़ 20 करोड़ 50 करोड़ 100 करोड़, क्योंकि गूगल से नीचे तो कोई बात ही नहीं करता है। वहां पे सर 25,000 रुपए के इन्वेस्टमेंट से 2 लाख रुपए के इन्वेस्टमेंट पे आप 500 रुपए से 5,000 रुपए रोज कमा सकते हैं सर। एस टाइप का हमने सिस्टम वहां बिठा रखा है। एंड सर आई हैव रिक्वेस्टेड मेनी स्कूल्स पर्सनली सर, सिंस आई डू सो मेनी कॉन्फ्रेंसेज, मैंने कहा आपसे मैं एक पैसा नहीं लूंगा, प्लीज बच्चों को लाके वहां पे उनको दिखाइए तो सही एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप है क्या भला। क्योंकि सर आप सब तो इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट हैं, तो बरलिया साहब इंडस्ट्री का मेरी नजर में तो मतलब ये है कि इन डस्ट यू ट्राई, एवरी मॉर्निंग यू गेट अप एंड यू देयर इज अ डस्ट अराउंड यू एंड यू कीप ऑन ट्राइंग कि भाई मुझे मेरी फायर फाइटिंग कैसे करनी है। और मेरे को लगता है कि हमारा बच्चा उसके लिए अभी तक तैयार नहीं है। सेकंड मैसेज सर मैं बच्चों को ये देना चाहता हूं और सारे स्कूल लीडर्स को रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहता हूं कि हमारे बच्चों को हम ये सिखाएं कि वो अपना ब्रांड कैसे क्रिएट करें। सर ब्रांड बड़ा होकर नहीं क्रिएट होता। मेरा यह मानना है सर कि बच्चों के बारे में जो धारणा स्कूल या कॉलेज में बनती है वो जिंदगी भर उसी ब्रांड को लेके आगे चलते हैं। तो मेरा ये रिक्वेस्ट आपसे है, इफ यू डोंट कंट्रोल व्हाट पीपल थिंक अबाउट यू, देन पीपल विल मेक एनी कंक्लूजन अबाउट यू एंड दैट इज व्हाट यू नॉट वांट। और मेरा सेकंड मैसेज सर टू माय ग्रेट स्कूल लीडर्स एंड टू ऑल द टीचर्स इफ दे आर लिसनिंग टू मी, मैं आपसे हम्बली एक रिक्वेस्ट करता हूं कि प्लीज डू नॉट अंडर एस्टिमेट योर इन्फ्लुएंस ऑन द लाइव्स ऑफ अदर पीपल। हर बच्चा अपने टीचर में अपना लीडर देखता है। वो अपने मदर फादर को 60 बच्चों के सामने खड़े होकर भाषण देता हुआ नहीं सुनता है, वो अपने टीचर में अपना लीडर देखता है। इट ऑल डिपेंड्स ऑन अस कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस we are imparting on the lives of the student opposite to us, and one need to be very careful. मैं सर स्कूल एजुकेशन में कहता हूं कि टीचर्स यदि आपको कभी टेस्ट करना हो ना, तो यदि आप मंडे स्कूल गए, ट्यूसडे गए, वेडनेसडे को पूछना कि बच्चों पता है मंडे को मैंने येलो साड़ी पहनी थी, चिल्ड्रन विल जंप, नो मैम यू पुट ऑन ब्लू साड़ी ऑन दैट डे। दे हैव सच अ इम्पैक्ट ऑन योर लाइफ। सो द पॉइंट आई एम ट्राइंग टू से सर, नया एजुकेशन पॉलिसी बहुत अच्छी बात है, फिलॉसफी भी बहुत अच्छी है, दुनिया भर का ज्ञान बट रहा है, ये भी बहुत अच्छी बात है। पर बात ये इंपॉर्टेंट है सर कि हम कितनी ऑनरशिप के साथ उस काम को करते हैं, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द पर्पस ऑफ एजुकेशन सर। सर जो लोग स्कूल एजुकेशन से जुड़े हुए, गार्ड को पूछिए कहां जा रहा है, बोले स्कूल जा रहा हूं। एमडी ऑफ द स्कूल पूछिए कहां जा रहा हूं, बोले स्कूल जा रहा हूं। प्रिंसिपल को पूछे कहां जा रहा हूं, स्कूल जा रहा हूं। बच्चे कहां जा रहे हैं, स्कूल जा रहे हैं। ड्राइवर कहां जा रहा है, स्कूल जा रहा है। एवरीवन इज टॉकिंग ऑफ स्कूल। इसका मतलब हर स्टेक होल्डर उससे जुड़ा हुआ है, पर हम कितनी वैल्यू एड लेके आ पाते हैं, आई थिंक सर दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। एंड टू ब्रिंग इन हैप्पीनेस, मैडम ने हैप्पीनेस की बात कही, मेरे को लगता है ओनली हैप्पी पीपल प्रोड्यूस हैप्पी रिजल्ट्स। इफ चिल्ड्रन आर हैप्पी एट स्कूल, दे विल बी हैप्पी एट होम, and if they are happy at home, they will be happy at school. To all my parents, my request is please do not discuss politics in front of your children. क्योंकि जो सुनेंगे वही लेके जाएंगे। यार मेरे मम्मी पापा ऐसे करते हैं। और बरलिया साहब, मैंने परसों के दिन आपके साथ ये कही थी कि मेरा इस समय जो बिगेस्ट वरी है सोसाइटी का, वो वरी ये है कि द कम्युनिकेशन बिटवीन फादर एंड सन हैज गॉन डाउन ड्रेस्टिकली। और मैं with due permission of yours, I just want to show a 1-minute video if my chairman allows me.
Shakari, please go ahead, and after you we have to get Harbhajan ji in because
Yes,
I interrupted him in the middle of his
I
comment.
will share only 1 minute, only a 1-minute video, and I'm sure it would make so much of sense to all my audience. This is what I want.
पापा, आपके लिए। और पापा, थैंक यू।
किस बात के लिए?
हर बात के लिए।
निकली है आज बरसों की बातें, कब से दराजों में रखी थी यादें, लिखी है लम्हों से अपनी किताबें, कब से दराजों में रखी थी यादें, कब से दराजों में रखी थी यादें, कब से दराजों
जिन्हें शायद आप कभी कह नहीं पाए, उन्हें कहिए थैंक यू। 5,000।
So this is the message, sir, I wanted to convey to all my audience कि please learn to say thank you. सर अभी कॉलेजेस का नया टाइम शुरू हो रहा है, हर कॉलेजेस ओरिएंटेशन कर रहा है, उनको बड़ा ज्ञान देने से पहले इतना तो कहिए प्लीज थैंकफुल टू योर पेरेंट्स कि उनकी वजह से आज वो कॉलेज पढ़ने आ रहे हैं. I believe this.
Thank you so much for that
Thank you,
sentiment. By the way, you will be happy to know every orientation that I am invited to, I make sure everybody closes their eyes and thanks their parents or whoever pushed them to get here. Harbhajan ji, I am sorry. I realized I interrupted you in the middle of it because I got excited to grab Mr. Sharma. Please go ahead. You were saying.
First of all, thank you, Doctor. It was really, really heart-opening. You are a teacher by heart and I am a student by heart. In fact, I have started my journey as a Majdoor and I stepped down as a director from a multinational. And it has been a continuous journey. What you said is, anything that you do, means I keep on telling you may not get in life what you love. But if you start loving what you get in life, things will become easier. See, the policies which are being made, when they go to the level of ground, there are so many implementation mechanisms which create problem. But the thing is that at least we have started moving in the right direction. From 1986 to 2020, the curriculums have changed. The way the things need to be taught have changed. But the core of it, the respect for the teacher has not changed, sir. And like wherever the respect emerges for the teacher, and it has to come from the parents also. It is not only for the student. You very rightly said that the impact, I keep on telling people all the time that after the age of 2 years or 2.5 years, first 2.5 years, it is the parent, maybe the mother, who has the highest impact on human being. But once the child goes into the primary level, it is the primary school teacher around whom his world rotates. My grandson comes and he tells me, my teacher has given me star. Yesterday, she has given me this chocolate. I performed well. So all the time their world rotates around the teacher and they have a very powerful impact on them. And then when they reach the age of adolescence, then it is peers and that is how the life goes on. What I was thinking during this discussion is, education is such an important subject. There is no human being who does not want his children to be educated and do well in life, whether he is rich, poor, literate or illiterate. Everybody has a pull of education and everybody feels that my child should be educated and do better than me in life. The problem is the whole ecosystem which is there does not has the support or the political backing of the people who can really make the difference in the lives of the people. See, if you see the budget allocation which is there for the education and health, it is always at the lower ladder of the entire GDP that is being spent. Now, because of Corona, everybody has started focusing on medical systems, but no Corona has come on education as yet. But I really actually congratulate Delhi government. Means whatever has happened in these last 4 or 5 years, so far as the quality of the education in government schools has happened, I think that is really heartening. So it is also in the society. I think we will have to get out of the clutches of political system to deliver something which means to us. And unless the teaching community, like गाड़ी चलाने के लिए ड्राइवर की सबसे ज्यादा अहमियत है, एजुकेशन में in my perspective टीचर की ही सबसे ज्यादा अहमियत है. And all these great institutions, like whether it is Ford School, SRCC, your school Goenka, means whatever you people are doing, you have been able to do because they are being headed by the people who are very passionate towards their cause. The problem is that most of the places where people head these institutions or the political system, they are not passionate towards it. And when a person is not passionate, he's just doing his 8 hours duty, आते हैं जाते हैं, and then they find ways and means कि इससे हमें कुछ बनाना है या नहीं बनाना है. I met one of the registrars in one of the government universities. He was seeking some help from me under CSR and all. He said, हरभजन जी, मैंने कहा आपके पास सर इतना बजट है. He said मेरे को एक पेंसिल भी खरीदनी है ना, तो उसकी भी ऑडिट होनी है और मेरे को 10 ब्यूरोक्रेटिक हर्डल्स पार करने हैं. So the speed of
Harbhajan, I think you raise an incredible point. And, I'd love to get Professor Kaur in on this as well to answer to that. Professor Kaur, one of the critical issues that what Harbhajan ji has raised, apart from the passion issues that we face, we have many public universities, and his story resonates with me so well because this is a huge conversation. I have been invited on various public university committees, directorships, etc. And the one thing which I always notice is the absolute amazing amount of funding that they have. Sometimes hundreds and hundreds of crores, which, in the last 3 months, right before the budget reallocations are coming, they all are trying to rush to spend it down. And in many places, we have such starved institutions who are doing so well with so less. How do you think the NEP will allow good public universities and good public colleges to have more autonomy on their spending processes, or is it just going to be an academic thing, but then they are still stuck? And as Harbhajan ji said, wo har pen ke liye ek, they have to audit on that, and therefore, people don't want to spend money only, forget about upgrading institutions.
It's a very deep question, and it's very important that when you are a public funded university, you need to be accountable for the funds. That goes without saying. Now, the question is to what extent autonomy is to be granted while at the same time you want accountability. And this is a very debatable but a very important discussion point. And most of the universities are audited. There are internal audits, there are external audits, and GFR rules have to be followed. There is a government e-marketplace. So if you're buying your stuff from the GME portal, which is a government market portal, you have more liberty in utilizing the funds. And under the GFR rules, anything up to 25,000 is to be treated in a different manner, up to 2.5 lakhs is in a different manner. So you have clear autonomy in utilizing up to a certain level. Beyond that, limited autonomy because you have to go for quotations, and beyond that, it's a tender process. Rules are good to be followed, especially when it is money and when it is the public money. Related to the money aspect, I will discuss the question of would all public and private universities have equal amount of funding, or is it easier for some to have it? Unfortunately, because education, teaching, learning outcomes are not tangible, the only way in which we judge quality of education is by way of the expenditure spent on education, because there is no other tangible method by which you could do so. So input spent becomes your output yardstick of what it would be. What is required is a researcher's angle to see what is the expenditure per head per student vis-a-vis the learning outcomes, whether it is in terms of the placement of the student in the higher education or whether it is in terms of the board exams result. So unless you have the data saying whether expenditure actually matters for teaching learning, we should not necessarily be saying that it should be 10% or 20%. There are several government programs at the state level as well as at the central level. It could be public distribution system, it could be any other safety net program, it could be Manrega, where leakages happen where the amount of money spent is actually not the amount which reaches the targeted audience. So governance matters. And therefore, to my mind, if there is a vigil on the leader of an organization in terms of an audit is important. A related aspect to the money, which I think has been deliberated upon earlier also on today's platform, is what would happen to the expenditure on education during the COVID times. Certainly, these are very unprecedented times, and the businesses are in the downfall. GDP growth rates have fallen. India, unfortunately, is the only country which has had the largest slip, close to 23.9% GDP has fallen. It's because we've had the maximum amount of a lockdown period. So when your lockdown periods are the stringent most, your GDP growth rates will fall. Revenues to be generated by the education sector are expected to come down. And so the question comes, how do we maintain the 6% as a GDP? Simple statistical tells us that if your GDP, which is your denominator, is going down during the COVID times, and you continue to spend the same amount of education, it probably will be easier to you to reach the 6% level, not tougher. But the question comes, if you're still not having that amount of money, where do you get it from? Very rightly, CSR initiatives are important. If the leader of an organization needs some kind of a financial autonomy and CSR pitches in with their funds, or the alumni pitches in their funds, or the philanthropic activities pitch in their funds, these should supplement the money which is provided to these organizations through the UGC. And under the new education policy, the overall pillar is the Higher Education Commission of India, but with very clear 4 verticals, of which one of the verticals would be the financing part of it. So held properly, the leaders of any public institution should be.
Just to point out, one of the very interesting things what they have said was that the developmental finance will go to those who are in need the most rather than those who have the highest reputations, which I thought was a very, very interesting view of the world, wherein historically, and I've been part of government committees where they invite industry and all to do policies, and they said, oh, we have to give 3,000 crore of grant or 1,000 crore of grant. And I stopped attending those policies because I know what the end is going to be. It's the same 15 institutions that are going to get all the money, and all the hard work done in ranking, grading, figuring out options. And those monies are, and those institutions are so flush with cash, they don't know where to spend it on because they have their own quality metrics and they are unable to find quality projects in which to push the cash where you have other things. And so I take your point there. I think it's very nice that in the new NEP, that developmental focus, that it's great that we have maybe top 20, top 30 institutions of the country, but the government should focus its money both in the public and in private domain is enabling the next 50, 100 to come up rather than throwing money and the top institutions. And I've seen the wonderful work many of the top public colleges have done, can raise a lot of funds from industry and alumni. I mean, that is how the majority of colleges in the West, particularly in the US and Canada, are able to raise funds from their alumni. And it's something that we can really see in India that's coming up. And I think colleges with the reputation of being in the top 20 of top 30, if they've done a good job for the students, I see no reason why they can't reach out to their alumni and generate the funds that they need to be fully self-sustainable.
Very right. We have to explore these options across institutions. Even schools must go back and get connected with their alums and the CSR initiatives.
And I think the government would be very open to allowing that to happen. I know there are several laws and regulations, particularly on there's a huge problem with the Societies Act. There are huge problems with the regulatory structure, which right now doesn't allow private players or even government players. For example, I know the IIMs ran into a lot of trouble when they were trying to create an endowment, because the way some of these laws are written, you are not allowed to create an endowment. You have to spend 80% of whatever you get in the year that you have gotten it. And I think I hope that when the NEP starts to get implemented, those reforms are put in, that every public university, every public college, every private university, school, college, etc., has the capability of creating and enabling endowments by alumni, by well-wishers, by industry. I'll share with you a small story. I won't tell you the year because I'll get into trouble by the governments who are there in power. but certain years ago, CIA had a program where we wanted every company in Delhi to adopt a local school. And I still remember showing up to the Department of Education with a list of all our companies who had volunteered to adopt a school. And the very nice gentleman there said, "Sir, if you want to know anything about any private school in Delhi, we can tell you. We have been tracking them, we have been controlling them, we have been regulating them, we know their fees, we know what they're doing, etc. Government schools, give us 30 days, we will find you a list." And this was their own schools they were running, right? And so part of the entire issue is that I think, and I take it from what Dr. Shankar Goenka has said, I take it from Dr. Wat Singh has, and particularly what Sharma ji is saying, that this is a collective effort. We can't just say it's the government's responsibility to spend money and to build up these schools. I think society plays a large role, and I love your a push on CSR and mandates. Those are something that we absolutely know. I'm going to take a few audience questions as well. I've been trying to thematically roll them in as I'm getting them. But one of the big questions I think a lot of students and parents have been asking us, and Professor Kaur, since you're on you, then I'd love to get Mr. Sharma Goenka ji and Professor Das on this, is Dr. Goenka, I think, pushed this out by talking about comparative exams, right? And I think part of what the new system is trying to do is there's been a rationalization of all the board exams of the country, and in many ways creating the NT, the National Testing Agency, which is going to now take over all the everything except medical and law. So I think NEET and law is out, but all the engineering, all the HG, this exam, that exam, all of that gets rolled into one national exam. And for better or worse, if you get 10 educationists to talk about standardized testing, 7 hours later, we are still going in circles. But let's say the NEP has said that they will do that, as well as given colleges flexibility in their admissions to take a lot of other criteria. Now, colleges had sports quotas and they were giving points for this. But one of the issues that has plagued India, and we have a lot of audience questions on, and particularly I think parents of students who are saying that assuming this is, let's say, implemented in 2021 or 2022, most likely as the rules come in, how do you see admissions across colleges change? Do you think public and Delhi University is famous for its CBSE cutoff marks, and have audience questions saying that due to grade inflation today, their marks, which were supposedly superb in the 80s, are now being discounted by by recruiters. You're a 78 percenter, but when actually 78% at those times was considered to be very, very high. Now you have so many students, thanks to grade inflation, getting 99%, 98%, 97% and up. How do you see admissions change broadly across public universities? And do you think public universities like DU, like others, will actually have the flexibility to come out with their own admission criteria, or will, in the interest of transparency, in the interests of post, still try to go down that, okay, we'll have a national exam, and then whatever rank you get on the national exam, then we'll go down that list. Professor Kaur, starting with you, and then, of course, Professor Das as well from the private side, and who have perhaps a little bit more flexibility on this.
Thanks, Aditya. If you look up the national education policy, you'll realize it says while there will be a national testing agency, the existing universities continue to have the option of adopting whatever system they want. So it's not mandatory that you have to have your students through the national testing agency. And I think it could be a blended model to begin with. For some of the courses, you may have a national testing agency. For others, you still might continue to have your own university framed examination for some of the courses, while for others, you could continue to have your class 12th based results. Some of the issues which any central university faces is when students graduate and come out of their class 12th exams, we have different states giving different kind of marking systems. So particular states end up having largely little more marks as compared to any other state marking board systems. So the moment the students are coming from a national testing agency, at least this kind of an issue gets resolved because everybody is at par. Whether this is being done at a national level or whether it is being done at a university level, we kind of negate or mitigate the interstate marking systems when we are testing them ourselves. Another question was, how do we ensure inclusivity in terms of sports quota or extracurricular quota? This particular NEP policy has been very across pages saying we will remain inclusive in our approach. And inclusivity would be gender, it could be across socially disadvantaged groups, it could be caste systems, it could be the OBC, it could be the economically weaker section. So even if the marks are coming through the National Testing Agency, just like in the existing structure, you have a different cutoff for each group. You can continue to have a different cutoff, whether it's sports, whether it's ECA, or whether it is OBC, SC, ST. So those options all remain available.
Ma'am, just to ask you on that, you raised a very, very important point. One of the heartburns, particularly when applying for central universities for students coming in from different states, is, as you rightly said, different boards in different states have different marking levels. And, quite frankly, all of us have heard, and I'm sure Dr. Goenka has, I've seen him here about, talk about this as well in his speeches. You have newspaper front end, this time maths paper was easy. CBSE maths paper was easy. 5 interviews with students. How did you like the math paper? Oh, it was very easy. Everybody's going to get 99% on it, right? Or, UP board, oh, this time, English paper was very hard. And I know the struggles that central universities have on how do we do it. The NEP has proposed a rationalization of all boards, with NCRT playing a large role in it. Do you think that this will make things easier, that the rationalization will actually work? Or do you think we will still have, because the examinations are still being set by each board, we'll still have this very wavy pattern of class 12th, and therefore eventually everybody will have to move to the NTA?
As I mentioned, the NEP is giving the option to the universities to adopt whatever system they want.
Which one would you recommend?
See, my recommendation would be that I have seen sometimes totally going on the numbers does not give you flair of the student, which is a very subjective approach. So often, if there is an in-person interaction where some kind of a weightage is also given to an interview process, but it is again important because all kind of subjectivity elements come in, and therefore the people who are hiring the, taking the student in their own college or university, and I'm talking about a general level, become questionable because the aspects on which you have given him marks are little subjective. So how do we take care of this, supplementing in-person interaction with the student vis-a-vis the marks? So there are pros and cons of each of the system, and I don't think a unique system can be adopted unless greater deliberations are done. But as and when it comes to a national testing agency, we must explore what are the differences vis-a-vis the erstwhile system, because the existing system is giving us a problem.
Absolutely, ma'am. And just for our audience, the current NEP is heavily influenced by the US, to the point in the earlier drafts that put miles instead of kilometers, and they had to delete those because they realized they had done a cut-paste job from a few of the US policies. But there is a lot of lawsuits against the SAT exam in the US because low-income communities and certain ethnicities, due to cultural issues, tend to score badly on those year after year after year. And therefore, they have been actually seen as non-inclusive. And it will be very interesting to see what the NTS does. But Professor Das, I think this is something which, management schools across the country do as well. You have interviews, you have group discussions, you have a much more nuanced admission process. How do you balance this right now? And how do you see the NTA playing a role in this? Professor, you're on mute. Please go ahead now.
A centralized exam is something which we have to look very carefully. But as far as based on one exam, the student assessment is concerned for admission, we are fairly dynamic, and we look at the performance and the results the previous years, and we modify the selection criteria, which are of course announced before the selection begins. So we, for example, these days the group discussions are not held. We are not doing any group discussion in the assessment, but we do have a written ability exam. The students are asked to write half a page given a space. So we want to check that because we thought that this is the important element. And this is based on the feedback that we have received based on the assessment and selection that was used earlier and the performance down the line when they take admission. Now, coming back to a national common examination, we have to look at it very carefully. I mean, I'll give you an example just to drive the point home. Let's say, for example, I have a class of 100 students, and let's assume that 50 students are extremely brilliant and another 50 students are very low on brilliancy. Now I have one exam. Now, if I take one exam, if I set a very difficult question, the top 50% guys will still be able to score it. And the purpose of any exam is to discriminate one student versus another. That means I should be able to know the difference between two students, right? So if I set a very difficult question, the top guys, some of them will answer, some of them will not answer. But the bottom 50% guys, none of them will answer. So I can discriminate between the top 50 students, but the bottom 50, I will not be able to know who is better among those bottom 50. So I have a problem. If I set a very easy set of questions, then in a easy set of questions, the bottom guys, some of them will answer, some of them will not answer. So I can discriminate in the bottom 50%. But the top 50%, everybody will answer that question. So when I set an easy question, I will not be able to discriminate between the top 50 questions, who is better than who, right? So now that's the important difference when you have the entrance exam for the management education. You have the CAT exams, you have other exams which are also being conducted. Now somebody who has scored, let's say, a 40 percentile in CAT would be nowhere, would be scoring 90 percentile or 95 percentile in another exam. So if you have a common exam, then you have this difficulty of discriminating the best students or discriminating.
So you won't have a spectrum. So you won't have. So you won't get that spectrum. And absolutely. The difficulty is that essentially, as Professor Kaur said, you'll have a one shot in or out. In fact, it's worse because you can't have a more.
And especially because the large population that we are in as a country, it is very difficult to have a common exam for all sets of students and yet to be able to give differential marks to students, which is very important for a selection process. So you have to have multiple exams to ensure different classes of students are assessed appropriately.
And so you don't believe a single examination, no matter how many education experts, if all of you were on that board, you cannot.
I've done a lot of work in
your opinion, it's not possible.
Not possible. We have done a lot of work in this and have gone very deeply into this. You have a problem in if you're using that exam for a selection process.
Sharma ji, your thoughts on one of the things that will happen is that the Delhi government will come up with its own board, but then you have the danger that, eventually over time, due to different pressures, the vast majority of universities will start. Okay. So to contextualize this, one of the key advantages that Delhi students have always had is that they do CBSE. And because of the nature of CBSE, almost all central universities end up falling back on CBSE and NCERT. It's also the fact that CBSE exams are directly NEET exams. And there is a lot of thought process that what will end up happening is that whatever CBSE is the examination will end up with NCERT, will end up with NTA, right? And so suddenly the built-in advantage that Delhi students had, where they were following CBSE and they moved to the happiness curriculum, which has been touted as a superior curriculum, and that they will have to now default back to the National Testing Agency criteria. And given the as Professor Das said, given the socio-economic issues, suddenly we might have that these students in a couple of years aren't able to perform as well on the NTA as you would have thought. So do you subscribe to this this having a central global exam?
Aditya, we have to look at what problem are we solving. All along the policy says that we want to discourage rote learning. We want to develop critical thinking, communication, problem solving abilities among children. So it talks about, and one of the most beautiful part of this policy was, personally speaking, was when it recommended dismantling 10+2 system and instead suggesting this 4-stage model. So under this 4-stage model, naturally, if you think logically, what should happen is that each stage should assume equal importance. Suddenly, if you are going to retain, and one of the things which we have said, and I personally believe that in that context, now retaining class 10 and 12 board examination is absolutely like pulling the whole advantage back to where we were. Because all along we have seen in the school education that right from the day one when the child enters nursery class, the preparation seems to be for the board exam that this child has to eventually take and the college that the child has to get in. So much so that the developmental need of the child at different stage in life gets neglected. So we were very excited when we saw this 4-stage 5+3+3+4 model of education. So what personally I believe is that 10th and 12th board examination across the board should be abolished. There is absolutely no need for it. Have a continuous evaluation of the child. And I agree with Dr. Das and Professor Kaur that there cannot be one exam which is going to determine the worth or the unworth of that particular child. You have entire journey, 15 years this child spends into a school system, and you are going to assess in one go, either through a 12th board examination or one examination of NTA. That's not clearly on. So one has to factor those accumulated learning over the years, create those repositories, which in fact the policy speaks about at some stage, that you have to have 360-degree assessment of the child. So eventually, when the child is getting into a higher education, what are you looking at? You are looking at the aptitude of the child, whether this child is suited to do this course, or you are doing this sorting exercise that I have 5 seats only and I am going to pick up those 5 and
absolutely
rest away. So at one level, when you are expanding your own capacity, you're talking about expanding your gross enrollment ratio, almost doubling into a certain spectrum, then you have to look at the aptitude of the child and find out whether this child is suited for the particular course he or she is opting for the higher education. And multiple NTA, I mean, giving multiple option, giving validity to the score for more than 1 year can be an option to decide that, and leave the school education to the continuous evaluation that you would do all throughout the year to assess what child has learned, what more the child needs to be supported at. So that's my take on that.
Perfect, Ji. Thank you so much. We have a few minutes left, Ji. Dr. Goenka, your last words on this. And if Harbhajan Ji is still there, my apologies. I thought you had to leave. Last couple of minutes on standardized testing. Harbhajan Ji, if you are there, of course, one of the things on assimilating special needs children particularly, and how the NTA will do that, as well as industry. But first to you, Dr. Goenka, you have been very passionate about competitive exams and all. We do have only about 3 to 4 minutes. So your last 1 minute, 2 minute thought on that.
So you gave me 2 minutes, I'll complete in 2 minutes, sir. Sir, number 1, मेरा सब लोगों से एक रिक्वेस्ट ये है कि सारे लोग हायर एजुकेशन की बात करते हैं, प्राइमरी एजुकेशन की बात अभी जो हो रही है सर, विच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, क्योंकि मेरा ये मानना है रूट अच्छा होगा तो फ्रूट अच्छा होगा सर। और दूसरी बात है सर कि जैसे कपिल सिब्बल साहब को सपना आया कि सीसी इंप्लीमेंट कर दीजिए, उसको करते करते सारे टीचर से क्लर्क बन गए। अब ये फिर नया आएगा, फिर और कोई नया ड्रामा होगा, फिर कोई आएगा, तो कम से कम बच्चों के साथ आने वाले टाइम पे खिलवाड़ नहीं करें सर। बस यही मेरा कहना है कि have a proper, whatever you do, take time. I'm sure this policy has been given a lot of thought and a lot of homework has been done into this. Now Delhi government says sir कि हम अपना बोर्ड बनाएंगे, यानी फिर वो एक नया व्हील रीइन्वेंट करेंगे, फिर वापस से कंफ्यूजन होगा, फिर पता नहीं दोबारा भगवान आप आएगी नहीं आएगी, फिर दूसरी गवर्नमेंट आएगी बोलेगा नहीं वापस से सीबीएसई पे आओ। तो मेरे ख्याल से जो करें सोच समझ के करें सर, विच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। यदि दिल्ली गवर्नमेंट को लगता है कि भाई हमारा ये हैप्पीनेस करिकुलम बहुत अच्छा है, तो 2 पीरियड बढ़ा दीजिए उसको। एक पूरा व्हील री इन्वेंट करने की मुझे लगता है कि जरूरत नहीं है। बाकी केजरीवाल साहब तो केजरीवाल साहब हैं, वो तो अपनी नई लाइन खींचना चाहते हैं, तो उसके ऊपर किसी का जोर नहीं है। पर मेरे को लगता है कि इंस्टेड ऑफ जस्ट री इन्वेंटिंग द होल व्हील 100%, आई बिलीव यदि आपके पास एक ऐसा कुछ है जो कि पूरी दुनिया इसका एग्जाम्पल मानती है, तो उसके 2 पीरियड बढ़ा दीजिए। बहुत सिंपल सी बात है। वैसे भी आपको काफी सारी लिबर्टीज हैं करने की, तो उसके बदले वो अच्छा होगा। अदरवाइज क्या होगा, भारत के तमाम बच्चे दिल्ली पढ़ने आते हैं, गवर्नमेंट के, नॉन गवर्नमेंट के, पर्सनल, प्राइवेट, सब तरीके के बच्चे, उनके लिए फिर एक नई माथाकूट होगी। तो आई बिलीव गवर्नमेंट शुड थिंक अबाउट इट।
शंकर जी, इतना आसान नहीं है। इट इज द टेल डॉग। आपका जैसी परीक्षा होगी वैसी ही क्लास में आपको दिखाई देगा। सो आप अगर पेडागोजी में चेंजेस, टीचिंग लर्निंग में चेंजेस अगर आपको नहीं दिखाई देते ना, ट्रेस इट डाउन, बिकॉज द टीचर पिक्स अप द क्वेश्चन पेपर कि क्या पूछा जाएगा उसके हिसाब से। एंड दिस इज व्हाट आवर reigning trouble with CBSE has been. You reform. We did not take that decision in a day. But if you are promoting rote learning, you are asking the question which is basically testing the recall of the child. What option do we have? आप 21st century skills की बात करते हैं, preparing child for the next world that is emerging, और आप एग्जाम और परीक्षा वही लेंगे जो 19th century में डिटरमिन की गई थी,
बिल्कुल
कैसे चलेगा? This is a
I fully agree with you, and the big highlight is what is tested is what is taught. Which is exactly we've seen that. Harbhajan ji, 10 seconds. I've already been getting
that skill aspect will get enhanced because of this policy, and industry will benefit out of it.
Thank you.
No, perfect. Thank you so much. I wish we had an hour and a half, 2 hours to go through. We have barely scratched the surface. We haven't talked about the multiple board exams. We have barely scratched some of the very, very important points that Professor Das, Professor Kaur raised. Sharma ji, you have given us so much time today. Thank you. By the way, Sharma ji was supposed to come in for 15-20 minutes, and he had a very busy day. And I'm very deeply grateful for him to actually have stayed through the entire discussion.
To learn from so many different people.
And I think one of the things which he brings to the table, which I always admire and love, it's very nice for us to talk in platitudes and this vision, that vision. But one of the biggest things which I said, and my master's thesis at Harvard Business School maybe about 10-12 years ago was actually doing a 300-year literature review of everything that was said on education. And one thing which I discovered is that there is not much more to add. Everything that had to be said has been argued until the cows come home. You'd be surprised the same debates on pedagogy, curriculum, on testing was as valid in the 18th century as 19th century as 21st century. And there is, and I think that's why people are saying that it's a 1960s policy which is being implemented in 2020. It just shows how far the thinking of India was post-independence. And then we had the education dark ages in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and hopefully we'll come back. But my deepest gratitude to everybody here. My thanks to all the attendees who have stayed with us for this entire discussion, on all the members directly on the Zoom platform, but of course all those who have been joining us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and such. I know there were so many questions for our panelists and so many worries from parents on how will this be implemented, how will things actually happen, what should I teach my child, what will happen to my school, what will happen to my college. I just want to tell everybody that these are the education leaders who you see in this panel who are very thoughtfully going to implement this. And these are the people who are going to make sure that no matter what happens in NEP, no matter what happens of all the implementation and policy, we will all ensure that the interests of students come first. And I think everybody on this panel has pledged that in their lives, and they have demonstrated it. So I have a lot of confidence that at least from the education side, where you have such great leaders there, they will put our students first, they will put our stakeholders first. I cannot say the same for other members and stakeholders of this, but as long as the people on the ground are fully committed, I can only see India and its education system move from height to height. Thank you, everybody. And please enjoy the rest of the CII Business Week. I hope to see all of you in all the various sessions that are going on. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you,
so
panelists.
much.
Thank you.